Hello, I'm Robert. Welcome to my channel where I fact check stories that scare you and help you if you're scared of many things. And this time it's about positive developments with the vaccines for COVID. So things are looking really very, very good in the long term, on a scale of a few months. So people right now, they're worrying about the Lambda variant, for instance, some people. It's a new variant that may have a little bit of vaccine escape, they don't know yet. It's based on lab tests only, and it's rather early to be able to detect vaccine evasion in the wild. So this is not likely to suddenly make all our vaccines stop working. It could, and this variant so far doesn't seem to be a very significant effect from the looking at the antibodies that it generates. With, for instance, the Pfizer vaccine, it seemed to be most of a concern with inactivated whole vaccine for some reason. We don't really know, but and if we do get a vaccine change, it's going to be gradual erosion. For instance, the Pfizer vaccine lab tests against the Lambda variant showed some reduction in neutralizing activity, but should still work. So that means the antibodies are just not quite so effective, but they still won't stop it. And this is one of the reasons why it's important to vaccinate quickly worldwide, is to stop all the new variants arising. Because perhaps every 25 million cases or something, I don't want to, this just gives you a for instance of how it might work. Then the first four variants arose in the first 100 million cases, variants of concern. So it works like that every few million, tens of millions of cases, then you get a new variant. That's enough infection, so there's enough evolution going on, so that you can expect you're creating conditions for a new variant to arise. And so this is why it's important to quickly stop the surge with vaccination worldwide. And so then I was just going to talk a little bit about why do I have a picture of, I don't have a picture of the spike protein, but the spike protein, you've probably seen pictures of it, it's got lots and lots of little sections on it that the antibodies can target. It's a huge complicated thing. And our vaccines are more effective after the booster shot, even though both shots are for the ancestral variant. Then the booster shot will, it's like it shows it to your immune system again. And the second time around, the immune system will notice more bits of the variant of the spike. It'll say, oh, here it is again. Here's that thing we've got to stop again. We haven't stopped it, so let's look a little bit more closely and find more ways of stopping it. That's basically what happens with the booster shot. So because it's got more ways of stopping it after the booster shot, then it's more easily able to stop the variants. So it's no surprise that double dose vaccinated people can have better protection, probably better protection than natural infection as well, because your body's forgotten about it and then it's given another very prompt look at it again. Some single dose vaccines are also very effective, so it depends on the vaccine. So each variant, it's the way that evolution works, each variant will only change a few amino acids in a huge hundreds of these amino acids that make up the entire protein, and it'll just change a few each time with each new variant. It only, because that's the way evolution works. You just change a few bits at a time. You don't change the whole thing in one go. It just can't do that. So that's why vaccines are going to be eroded slowly. And we already have vaccines tweaked to variants in clinical trials, and we should have our first doses based on these variant vaccines in the fall, in the autumn. So There's AstraZeneca, there's Pfizer and Moderna. They're all doing these vaccine tweaks. And then there's another idea. There's a vaccine candidate that targets the nucleocapsid. And this is a new idea. It works in hamsters and mice, and they actually, I'm not sure if they started clinical trials. I'll come to the actual vaccine. I think yes, they have. The first vaccine has been given to someone in clinical trials that targets this. Now this is, I've got a diagram down there. I'll show it to you. Here's the diagram, and then the spike protein is the outside of the virus, and this is what the virus uses to get into a cell. So if you use a vaccine that presents the spike protein, then that's going to stimulate mainly antibodies. And antibodies interfere with the exterior of the virus, and they stick onto it and they stop it getting into cells. And that's the B cells that do that. Now you have another kind of cells called the killer T cells. And the killer T cells, they go around your bloodstream. They're looking for infected cells, and they look for cells that on the surface of the cells they've got bits and pieces of the virus in them. I'm showing that the virus is inside, and then they go and kill them. And these are looking for the bits that they want to try and find the virus very early on, while it's being created inside the cell, and so they are looking for the internal bits of the cell. I'm not a biologist, so I'm just giving you a very rough idea. Maybe if I've messed anything up, then to explain in video comments and so on. But just a very rough idea. They describe it as that for the antibodies are like a camera looking at the virus from the outside. The killer T cells are like an X-ray, and they're looking for the insides of the virus. And if they spot a cell that is making virus, so this spots it before they go into the cell, this spots it when it's actually in the cell making new virus. And so if the nucleocapsid is a helical thing that is used to protect the virus from the cell contents while the virus is being made. And so the idea of Gritstone Bio is trying to train your killer T cells. So its vaccine, it has a mix. It has some of the spike protein, and it has some of the internals for the vaccine of the virus. And their idea is to try and trigger the killer T cell response by showing it the things that the killer T cells are looking out for, preferably. And so, and even an inactivated whole virus is not going to show you the internals of the virus so much, and this approach is. So it's quite a clever idea, and it works in mice and hamsters, and it may very well work in humans. And the idea is that the nucleocapsid changes much more slowly and is much more resistant to change than the spike protein. So if we can protect ourselves by stimulating the natural killer T cell response to the internals of the virus, then this may very well be a vaccine that is much more resistant to variants than just work with all the variants. Then there's the idea of a pan-coronavirus, and here's one that was tested in pigs. And this targeted something called the viral fusion peptide, and I think that is in the spike protein. Correct me if I'm wrong, but it's and viral fusion is to do with getting into the cell. But again, correct me if I'm wrong, but the main thing is that this is something that changes much more. They haven't found any changes of this viral fusion peptide in any of the variants for COVID-19. So it's very probably something that is rather vital to the virus and not easy to change. That if you will get variants changing almost anything in the virus at some point, but they don't even reproduce inside the cell properly. Or they reproduce, but then they just don't get into any other cells, so they're never able to spread. So if this is something that's actually vital to the virus, then it may be that the vaccine that targets that and just presents the viral fusion peptide to to your immune system, then that may work against all variants. But not only that, they were quite surprised. They were testing this in pigs. So they made two vaccines, one that protects against COVID-19, one that protects against Pet V, which is a disease that humans don't get, but pigs do. It causes diarrhea, vomiting and high fever, and killed almost 10% of US pigs when it first appeared. So in terms of animal veterinary care, then this is an important thing to have a vaccine against. But because it's in pigs, they can experiment with pigs in a way they can't with humans. And Pet V is a coronavirus. It's a very distant relative of COVID-19, but shares several amino acids and a fusion peptide with SARS-CoV-2, and these amino acids are shared also with all the coronaviruses. And so, and it has a big advantage. They can just use ordinary domestic pigs. They don't need to use genetically engineered mice and things like that. So they tested both these vaccines in pigs, and they're very surprised to find that their COVID-19 vaccine protected pigs against Pet V. Completely different coronavirus. They didn't protect them from the disease, or completely from the disease. They protected them from the symptoms, and they led them to mount a much more vigorous immune response when they're infected. So a vaccine that is targeted against COVID-19, specific to COVID-19, but includes this fusion peptide, then as something it presents to the immune system, may possibly be a pan-coronavirus vaccine. They'll surely tweak it to be as effective as possible against COVID-19. They give you secondary protection against other coronaviruses. But for all we know, it might protect us against colds as well. That a quarter of the common colds are coronavirus related. The 4 that are very mild, they become very mild over time. Probably they may have been originally as severe as COVID. No, they don't really know. They may have been mild all along. Maybe we're just unlucky. The 3 coronavirus that have infected humans recently were all severe, and all the 4 we've got already were all mild. Or it might be that that's the end state for COVID eventually, that after going up and down, getting more severe and then less severe, more severe and less severe, eventually it might get very mild. We just don't know. 3 out of 7 is just not enough to be able to generalize. But this is very promising because it could prevent us from being infected by future pandemics before they even jump over to human beings for coronaviruses. And coronaviruses are quite, quite a lot of them could jump, and we've had 3 of them already that have jumped to humans. So maybe there certainly are going to be more that jump in the rest of the century. This may be able to have a vaccine that will just protect people from all coronavirus pandemics in the future. That's a very, very promising thing. So lots of wonderful things going on. And these things at early stages, it's called that's a backstop for COVID-19. And this is a video that I got some of these ideas from there, and I may have just pulled up a good video about talking about the variants and vaccines by some experts in India and the United States. And so I just followed up what they said, and that's what they were talking about as a future development. And then I found the pan-coronavirus thing as well. They were talking about the Gritstone Bio thing, which is already in clinical trials, amongst other things. So, yes, and so a good summary there of what he actually said. Let's see, do I have the summary of him? What this expert said? So we have a whole package of antigens that are being targeted. We've got neutralizing antibodies, but right now they're like the cameras. Oh, that's a funny auto-translate thing. I'm sure it didn't say as a Catholic. I'll go through that. So we get some non-spiked protein immune targets, and they actually mutate more slowly than spike proteins, raise the hopes of immunity was both potent and long-lived, and T cells are also not especially vulnerable to vaccine escape. So if you can stimulate the T cells, which go and look at the interior terms of the vaccine, then they tend to be much more resistant to vaccine escape. And So that raises hope of immunity, which is both potent and long-term, long-lived, and T-cell dependent vaccines may also be particularly useful in immunosuppressed persons, and they're on drugs that blunt the B cells, which produce antibodies, or because of cancer chemotherapy. And so they blunted the B cells, but they've still got the T cells, the killer T cells. So if you can get a vaccine that stimulates killer T cells, then it may help stop the virus in immunocompromised people. So to sum up, our response in terms of public health has to be protect ourselves to prevent the virus from easy entry into our body, obstruct its transmission by not allowing super spreader events, vaccinate fast and wide, and develop new vaccines with innovations which can match the variations in the virus. And it's just incredible the speed with which this is going on. So I think I can't remember if I've done this one. Have I done a video? I don't know if I've done a video about this one, the light at the end of the tunnel. I don't think I have, so I'll do a video about that as well. So this is, I was saying, I just did one previous one that had a lot of rather negative framings, talking about negative things and trying to put it in a positive way of saying we've got to try and stop our governments from opening up, do what we can to influence our governments. Very, very slow process, like trying to change the direction of a supertanker, but cumulatively we have a lot of power just by spreading awareness of what is going on, and then being very careful yourself in the pandemic and protecting yourself and the people around you, and that is not nothing. You could be potentially stopping infection of hundreds of people around the world, not even know it, by being super careful in your own life. So don't think what you're doing is nothing because it's just you. Even one person could potentially be saving the life of saving hundreds eventually. You know, your case that you're stopping, it could eventually be hundreds of people, especially if what went through you was a new, more transmissible variant, and you stopped it from going any further. Then you're potentially stopping lots of people from being infected with COVID. If we all do that, then the cases start going down. It's as simple as that. If we're all very careful, and then together with other public health measures, cases will go down. Isolation, telling people who contacts if you test positive. All these things, I talked about that at the end of the previous video. So as much positive we can do now. What we've got to do, the cavalry are coming later this year, and then in the spring. The cavalry are coming and they're going to save the situation. Oh, sorry that's a bit of a, I don't mean that in the, it just as this, one should be a bit careful about using that metaphor, because that's used in the United States. It comes from Indians attacking the cowboys, as it were, and then they're waiting for the cavalry to come and defeat the Indians. So sorry about that. It's a little bit culturally insensitive to use that, but it's a common thing in the it's a common metaphor that's used. Anyway, the rescue is coming. The rescue helicopter is coming. It's going to it's going to be able to get us out of this. But for now, we're on our own. We've got to keep going, and we've got to keep going with the public health measures, which are very effective. We're like on a desert island. We can keep. It's like, I don't know. Maybe I'm getting too carried away with metaphors. But suppose you're trapped in a desert island. You know you're going to be rescued, but meanwhile you've got to find water. You've got to find food. You've got to get yourselves build yourself a house and so on to protect from the rain and so on, protect yourself from the insects and so on. In the same way, the vaccines are coming. They're definitely huge capacity for next year. Not just, I don't believe, we've got billions of spare doses, 2 billion spare doses just from the developed countries. They're surely not just going to throw them away. They're eventually going to go to the weaker economies too. And so World Health Organization are hoping for 40% of the entire world to be vaccinated this year, and then a higher percentage next year. They haven't quite got the doses there, but they're hoping we can get there, well over 20% of the entire world next year. Then we just got incredible vaccine capacity. We have the vaccine capacity to have one dose for everyone every 3 months of the year next year in the entire world. That's the vaccine capacity that's coming online. There's huge developments. We've got the weaker economies, the Pfizer and so on. There's got the first, the Pfizer BioNTech, then the CEO of BioNTech, and although Pfizer won't license their technology and do the technology transfer, the CEO of BioNTech, he is encouraging the WHO and cooperating with them to set up a messenger RNA vaccine hub in South Africa where Pfizer don't have any patents. So this means that they can produce the vaccine without having to get permission from Pfizer. And the whole of Africa, they just haven't bothered to patent it in Africa. And this means that Africa can make vaccines for other Africans without the restrictions of the Pfizer patents or the Moderna patents. There's just no messenger RNA patents in Africa. They just haven't bothered to try to take them out there. So that means that they can make vaccines for themselves. That'd be a huge, huge benefit. 1 billion people there who can make their own vaccines now. They can't do it yet, but by sometime in 2022 they will be able to make their own vaccines. And the mRNA vaccines are actually easier to make than conventional vaccines once you have the technology transfer. So it's a matter of, they're much easier, they're much safer to make, because you don't have to work with the virus itself. It's not like get a deadly virus, inactivate it. You don't have the bioreactors. It's a very, very safe and comparatively easy to make vaccine once people know how to make it. So it's got a huge potential for the rest of the world, and it can be used for making vaccines for other diseases too. So these are not the first, these are not the last messenger RNA vaccines we're going to see. We're going to see new messenger RNA vaccines for common diseases that affect places like Africa, where there's a huge, huge disease burden. There's epidemics every year. Your risk of dying of some disease or other is much higher in Africa than in Europe, say, because they just haven't had the vaccines to vaccinate everyone. So it's going to make a huge difference. And so looking forward in the long term, we're looking to a world is going to have much less by the way of disease in, say 2025. Then it'll be a world where there's much less disease in Africa, much less disease around the world, because of this huge vaccine capacity that we're building, and independent research too. So people in Africa will be able to research and develop new vaccines, which up to now has been the province of only the wealthy countries. And so we're going to have a huge, huge increase in vaccines that have been grown in hens' eggs. So they're already, I think it's Turkey, I think, is one of the first on the block with this one. A vaccine based on a hexapro tweak, which has been licensed for weaker economies. And it's going to be produced around, and Brazil I think is on that as well. And this can be grown in hens' eggs, and you get more vaccine shots per egg than you could do for flu. So potentially, once this vaccine is through the trials and and it's likely to be more effective even than Pfizer. Once it's done, it's not based on the mRNA technology; it's a slightly different technology. But so we've got all that coming along as well. We've got over 30 vaccines in phase 3 trials at the moment. Many different ideas being developed. And Brian Cox, who's a presenter, he's nothing to do with this field, but he was just interviewing other people, experts on the field, and he summarised up what they were saying. And he's an astrophysicist or something, not astrophysicist, what do you call it, particle physicist. he was interviewing them on this, and he summarised out what they were telling him, that we have done 1 year's worth of 10 years, decades worth of progress in vaccine technology in just 1 year. Absolutely incredible. Because there's just so much money being poured into it, so much ingenuity, people around the world working away at it, and also because so many people are getting sick. So these vaccines, you can immediately take them out and test them. And so the phase 3 trials were over in weeks, when it would have been years, if it weren't in the middle of a pandemic, because you have to wait for people to get sick to see if they've been protected by your vaccine. And you've got the placebo group and the other group to compare with. And in the future, obviously now we've got these vaccines, they will probably test Gritstone, for instance, think that with their vaccine, then they're only in phase 1, but when they get to phase 3, they will probably do a placebo trial where they compare the Gritstone vaccine with, say, Pfizer or something, another vaccine, so they get an idea of comparative effectiveness of it with Pfizer. And then from that they be able to get an idea, and then they also look and see what is generating by way of antibodies, get a whole picture kind of thing like that, and work out if it's working, especially if it turned out to be more effective than Pfizer. Then you'll be able to tell that with double placebo trials, where you could vaccinate people with Gritstone and vaccinate people with Pfizer, and maybe the Pfizer, whatever the latest Pfizer one is, and then the Gritstone, which is supposed to protect against all the variants. And then if they are correct in their hypothesis that it's actually better than Pfizer, which is what they're hoping it to be, that it's stopping against all variants, especially against variants, and the placebo trials would show that. But the placebo is another vaccine, rather than the placebo being not vaccinated at all. And so eventually and then they compared with different vaccine variants, and they'd see, oh well, the Pfizer is still working against this variant, but Gritstone is working better against that variant for people who got infected by that variant. So we've got, by this time next year, summer 2022, then I expect huge progress. And even if, remember that we can eliminate measles locally, which is R0 of 18, and which can't be stopped by test, trace, isolate, not very effectively. They can to some extent. Back before we had vaccines at all, they did actually do they did do test, trace, isolate for measles, and it does help. Kids would be kept at home and not going to school, so as not to spread measles to other people. So test, trace, isolate is not new. But nowadays we don't use test, trace, isolate for measles. It probably would help a little bit if we did. But but with just the vaccine alone, then we are able to stop measles, and it requires, it's nearly 100% effective vaccine, and if 95% of people get vaccinated, and this is by using that we'll be able to eliminate measles entirely from the Americas. So although it gets harder with more transmissible versions of COVID, they're nowhere near the transmissibility of measles yet. They're not, maybe up to 8, and it's measles 18. And so, and that's depending how high the R0 goes. There's maybe well be a limit to how high it can go with this particular virus. Then we're still within range that if we have a good enough vaccine, then we can eliminate it. So not with the current generation of vaccines, we can only stop it in combination with public health measures, so like New Zealand and Australia, and it's going to be difficult to stop it over the entire world by that method, because we need all the countries in the world to be doing these public health measures as well as vaccination to stop it completely with the current level of vaccines. It's going, especially with only 40% going to be vaccinated by the end of this year. And as we go through to next year, though, we're going to have much more effective vaccines. The Hexapro tweak should, for instance, if Pfizer the ancestral variant had the hexaploid tweak instead of the 2p tweak, and this stabilized the pre-fusion, the spike just as it goes before it fuses into the cell. So it looks out for viruses, it's just ready to infect the cell. Then it latches onto it at that moment. And the hexaploid tweak makes it much more stable in that position, so much more of the spikes that go in look like that, rather than the ones that are, I can't remember which way around it works, but it's the spike, the one just about to infect the spike, and that one, if your vaccine that you give to people has many more of that and has many fewer of the spikes that you don't want antibodies to, then you won't have much more effective antibody response. So the Pfizer vaccine has a whole load of dud spikes in it that are the wrong shape, as well as the ones that are the right shape. And this hexaploid tweak will mean that many more spikes are the right shape when it goes into you, so as to trigger a stronger immune response with a small amount of vaccine too. And so that's already underway and being tested in trials. And so it'd be very astonishing if the very first vaccine ever tested in phase 3 is as effective as it can ever possibly be. So 95% for Pfizer is remarkably high. It could well be higher. For measles, it's close to 100%. So we could have a vaccine by 2022 which is as effective as the measles vaccine. And so lambs outside my door. It's rather, it's not my own lambs, but my neighbour's lambs. Anyway, it's very entertaining. You often see them going past. I can't turn this around and show it to you. But anyway, so things are looking incredibly positive for next year and the year after. We will see an end to it. There's a light at the end of the tunnel. The science advance has been absolutely amazing, and we just have to keep going, and we're not yet on the home stretch, not quite yet. And what our government has been doing of opening up too quickly around the world, they're rushing and opening up far too quickly, then this is delaying control of the pandemic and ending the pandemic probably by several months. But we will end it. There is a light at the end of the tunnel. It's got a little bit further away because of these actions, but we will get there. And so hugely positive in the long term. There will be an end to this pandemic. Some people think that with lots and lots of variants eventually it'll get weaker, but we don't know that. Things like polio and smallpox, they never got any less deadly. So we don't know what it's going to do long term, but we do know the vaccines are going to stop it. And even with all the variants, even if it just spreads and spreads and it just rises back to the January peak again around the world, still the vaccines are going to stop it eventually. If we can manage to stop it if we can turn the trajectory downwards, then we can stop it faster, because we have fewer variants arise. We have because the vaccines, we don't need to advance quite so far in the vaccine technology before it's being knocked down and nearly gone. But it's rising fast, and in lots of cases it is going to lead to more vaccine technology, which is going to make it, the more the infections, the more the cases, the faster the pace of the development of the vaccines. So it's a race between the virus and the vaccines are going to win. The rescue helicopter is there. It's hoping it's going to get here sometime in 2022, probably. It could have got here at the end of 2021. It could have been largely gone from the world by the end of 2021 if we had been more careful with our public health, if the governments had stepped up and they had deliberately encouraged technology transfer for the vaccines and finance factories being around the world to build the vaccines in other countries and told them how to do it, and if we'd done a huge amount more in order to vaccinate the entire world much faster, then we could have been largely over it by the end of this year. But we haven't done that, but that is happening. But although the World Health Organization talk over and over about vaccine inequity, and there definitely is huge, very, very sad vaccine inequity, but nevertheless, we do have, even in Africa, we have a couple of percent of people vaccinated throughout Africa, and in a previous pandemics that would never happen so soon. So we are moving, we are getting a little bit better, but I think looking back at this from a couple of decades from now, people will look back and just think it's extraordinary that we only vaccinated the wealthy countries at this stage, because by then there will be vaccine production facilities all around the world, and if we get another pandemic, then the whole world will vaccinate at once. So I think that's what's going to happen by the end of the 2020s. In fact, probably by 2025, with this huge vaccine capacity, as long as we keep going with it. And this pandemic surging and continuing so long is stimulating this huge increase in vaccines around the world, because it's so important to get these vaccines and to be able to produce these vaccines. So anyway, so that is pretty positive situation in the long term, and it's really, we've got to keep going for a few more months, but there's some amazing, absolutely astonishing science that's coming our way, and maybe even like a pan-coronavirus vaccine will stop all the coronaviruses, or just nearly all of them, as even ones in pigs, that completely very unrelated coronaviruses, and there's incredible things coming along, and so hopefully this can help some of you. So my aim here is really to help some of you to be more positive about the long-term future. The World Health Organization keep talking about this as a light at the end of the tunnel, and this is what they're talking about.